Of course, women must earn less than men because they are weaker, they are smaller, they are less intelligent, and they must earn less. That's all.
Mr. Deputy, according to you and your theories, I don't have the right to be a deputy. And I know it bothers you and that you regret that today women are able to represent citizens just as you are. I personally am here to protect women from men like you.
For many men, professional equality and parity are still considered to be four-letter words.
How can you talk about 70 years of emancipation and still call us the weaker sex? It's unbelievable.
Subconsciously or not, many men find it hard to accept that women are their professional equals.
Let's not forget that we're asking men, who for so long have been on the highest branch of the most beautiful tree in the forest, with the finest view to the savannah, to cut the branch or to share it. These guys simply say, no way.
But things are gradually changing. Companies are beginning to acknowledge the benefits of gender diversity.
We know there's a very high correlation when there are 3 or more women on the top management team with the financial performance of the company.
Because most families can hardly do without 2 salaries now, it is time to demonstrate maturity and invent harmonious equality for the benefit of both women and men.
I fully understand how unsettling it can be to have a newcomer demanding a piece of pie that was never shared previously. But I do think it's a shame that there's not a more constructive debate regarding the issue of, what can you gain without me losing anything?
For centuries, power was masculine. While a few female pioneers managed to break the hegemony, many had to do so incognito.
Let me take you back to the 60s. Women were very much second-class citizens, and the idea of a woman setting up a serious business like a computer company people laughed at me.
Stephanie Shirley was one of them. In 1962, from her home in the English countryside, this mathematician decided to create her own software business. But she quickly realized that being a woman was a problem.
I was launching out dozens of letters introducing my company's services to potential customers. And I signed them Stephanie Shirley. And they got no result whatsoever. And I started writing my letters and signing them Steve Shirley. And 1 or 2 people responded.
The male pseudonym opened doors. Her company developed around a new concept, employing educated mothers who were usually considered unemployable. And this is how Penny Tutt joined the firm.
I was an air hostess with British Airways. It was a wonderful job. We weren't allowed to be married in those days. So because I was getting married, I left BA and I had 2 children. And when the kids went to school, I decided I'd like to start being Penny again rather than just mum. And that's where Steve's company was simply superb, because it gave us the opportunity to get back into work, working from home.
Stephanie, or Steve, enabled these mothers to reconcile family life and professional ambition. She invented telework 40 years ahead of its time.
There was no internet, even the telecommunications was basic. We used to ask potential applicants, do you have access to a telephone?
And from their homes, these women created softwares with just a pencil and paper. They designed systems for stock management or train dispatch that were then encoded and implemented in a computer center.
Ailsa Turner was our driver, and she used to go with her baby in the back of the car and my son in the back of the car. We would drive to the computer center and she would basically babysit while I went in for 20 minutes. Because we were all women, we helped each other and we made sure that what was visible externally was professional.
We were able to find the technicians that we needed because so many of them were highly qualified systems analysts or programmers who could no longer work because they had children.
These women revolutionized society's codes, hidden in plain sight.
Some worked in their bedrooms. They had a sort of study table there. One worked underneath the stairs of the house where there was a little cubbyhole. There was one at 5 o'clock. She would tidy up all her workplace. And I think as far as her husband knew, she had a little part-time job. In fact, she was working at a corporate level. So it was all sort of a little bit disguised.
The company developed increasingly sophisticated softwares and enjoyed tremendous success.
We could do anything that we wanted to if we were prepared to work hard for it. And we did. We did the black box flight recorder for supersonic Concorde. We did all sorts of interesting things.
In 1975, however, Stephanie Shirley faced unexpected turmoil when the British Parliament enacted a law banning sexual discrimination. Of her 300 employees, only 3 were male, and in the name of gender equality, she was forced to hire men.
Well, the first few men that came in were all the wrong sort. They came in because they wanted to be surrounded by 300, professional, qualified, bright women. It was just disaster. We eventually learnt how to recruit men.
And we were one of the very few companies who offered equal opportunities to men.
The adventure did not end there. In 1981, Stephanie Shirley decided to open the capital to her staff.
I think it's right and proper to share the risks, as we do, but also share the rewards. So I modelled on a co-ownership organisation here in Britain, and 70 of my colleagues are now millionaires. I'm very proud of that.
In 2001, Stephanie Shirley was named Dame Commander by Queen Elizabeth II. At 83, she remains a role model for women in business.
You can always tell ambitious women by the shape of our heads. They're flat on top for being patted patronisingly. There's nothing legally holding women back today, and the complaints that I hear from young women are just so trivial compared to 50 years ago. There is no reason why any woman in Europe should have any difficulty with business. It's all in the mind. If you think you can't do it, you won't. If you believe that you can, you will.
Everything is possible, but gender equality laws are rarely enforced, and inequalities remain.
There's a sort of wide gap between public policy that is gradually coming around to the idea that women are the equal of men, and the fact that a number of archaic minds perpetuate sexual stereotypes and grant women only minimal legitimacy.
As a result, in Europe, a woman earns 16.7% less than a man. It is even worse on the global level, with women earning 23% less than men. These inequalities are the result of centuries of male supremacy, and with the enactment of equal rights laws, the face of oppression of women is changing. Male domination has become more insidious and remains pervasive in the way women are talked about and represented. There are degrading cliches all over, in advertising and in many other media. Two stereotypes emerge from this flow of degrading images. both of which are very damaging, to say the least.
In the end, women are the only discriminated group with a dual image. A positive one, the protective image of motherhood, and the negative one, the seducer, the whore. And this dual image subconsciously comes into play in the workplace and perverts male-female relationships.
In France, 20% of women are sexually harassed in the course of their professional career. 80% of salaried women are regularly faced with sexist behavior, and no class is spared.
Sexism at work, a dirty word that nobody wants but that should be discussed openly, is an ideology built around male superiority that leads to a series of acts, behaviors and attitudes which in the long run belittle and destabilize women in the work market, even to the point of self-censorship. Therefore, sexism slows down the progress of policies dealing with gender equality.
And the vast majority of women is confronted to a blind corporate world that was not created for them. Businesses still find it difficult to open up positions of responsibility to women, even when they are more qualified than men.
Today, there are more and more female undergraduates with honourable mentions pursuing higher education. 50% of women in business schools, an exponential rise of women in engineering schools, and more than 60% in universities, etc., etc. So the problem is not about recruiting women, it's about recruiting talents, amongst whom there are logically more and more women.
Okay, now, Walt, you've had your little joke. Give her to somebody else. I ask for a man.
We don't have a man with her qualifications.
A company that doesn't see this is self-destructive and automatically deprives itself of talented people.
As with many professional fields, space is gradually reaching out for female talents. Since the conquest of space began, 488 men have been launched into the cosmos, but only 60 women. Italian astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti points out that still today, women are very underrepresented.
I understand that being one of the few women astronauts in Europe, and currently the only active one, for a lot of young women, I am a kind of role model, especially for those who aspire to pursue careers in aerospace or in general in science and technology. And of course, I see that as a privilege and in a way a responsibility.
Though women are still few in space, there can be no sexism because the priorities are safety and effectiveness.
For us in here, it would not be reasonable to have sexism because we work on quality, and doing something wrong will have large consequences. So sexism in here, in this environment, is counterproductive.
To avoid all forms of discrimination, Italian Loredana Bessone teaches future astronauts to live and work together under extreme conditions. Coming from all corners of the world, they must learn to overcome cultural barriers and preconceived notions of gender.
The more you are spending time with somebody of a different culture, whichever that culture is, could be gender, could be educational culture, the more you appreciate the differences and the more you speak the same language. So we call this a space culture. All the astronauts now leave the space culture and they feel like they belong to a group of spacefarers. And by then, you go totally out of your conventional thinking of cultures as differences.
In orbit about 350 kilometers from Earth, the International Space Station is the largest and most complex object ever sent into outer space. 6 astronauts, including 1 or 2 women, live there permanently for the purpose of scientific research. In Cologne, Germany, a team of flight controllers and engineers supervise the operations 24/7.
The hardware is ready to support. Crew surgeon has confirmed that.
For these highly technical professions, ESA recruits exceptionally talented people. Throughout her years of study, Australian Andrea Boyd had just one objective in mind: space. Today, she is in charge of communication with the astronauts.
We are ready to proceed with the first airway monitoring procedure. We are able to start when you're ready. And do you have any questions for us this morning? I've always wanted to work in space, and specifically actually in mission control for the space station. That was kind of my dream. It was being built when I was in primary school, and I saw it being built and thought it would be the most amazing project to work on. As a kid in Australia, we didn't really have a space industry at all, but I figured if I studied engineering, I'd figure out a way to get there during my studies, and I did. So I've been working here for quite a few years now.
Behind her control screens, Andrea keeps an eye on everything. The 6 astronauts have to live together in a very confined space and at the same time carry out scientific experiments, as well as manage their daily tasks.
The tasks there are split up between whoever's on station. There's no regard to gender. Everyone has a very similar attitude, so you might have a terrible day, maybe your cousin died or something, but you've got to focus on work for that day regardless.
Working in this very masculine environment hasn't prevented Samantha Cristoforetti, a former fighter pilot, from living her true passion.
This carriage is moving. 7 centimeters. See it moving. 13. I got 18 centimeters. And she's coming up.
Wow.
Imagine that. This was in outer space just
minutes ago. What does space smell like?
Whoa. It's not good.
Samantha Cristoforetti of the European Space Agency, now inside the Soyuz spacecraft that will be back in the Earth's atmosphere a short time from now.
Women are just as professional as men. Where then do these inequalities come from? And why do they endure in the professional environment?
A woman's diploma is worth less than a man's because it's not seen as a diploma. It's a valid degree, of course, but the woman is seen as coming with children and babies. She's like a soldier who's being held up, whereas a man is seen as independent and ready to be exploited.
Very little has changed in 50 years, and maternity is still at the heart of the problem.
For men, children play the role of a transparent climbing escalator. The more children they have, the more responsibilities and promotions they get. Look at the many CEOs with 5 or 6 children. For women, children are a down escalator. The more children they have, the more they're considered less motivated, less capable, held up from their job.
But gender balance at top executive positions is profitable. American Joanna Barsh has conducted a study with hundreds of companies for the McKinsey consulting firm. Her conclusions leave no room for doubt.
We know there's a very high correlation when there are 3 or more women on the top management team with the financial performance of the company. There is more, though. Women in general will bring different leadership skills, so the combination of what men and women bring is more powerful than what men bring on their own.
Some big companies have understood the importance of furthering the progress of women and have therefore organized coaching sessions such as the EVE program in Shanghai.
Today, in the next hour or so, we're going to learn about trust.
For Joanna Barsh, self-confidence is vital to leading a group.
It's very hard to accept somebody else if you haven't yet accepted yourself. And think about yourself. When people praise you, what do you do? Do you say, thank you? Or do you say, wasn't me?
It is essential to have self-confidence and to assert one's competences on the same level as men. But Joanna warns women they should not be tempted to imitate men and repeat typically male shortcomings.
Women can be as aggressive and competitive as men, but those women who get to the top in that game are playing with the same rules as the men play.
Now look here, Mr. Everhart, I'm just trying to run this office the way it should be run. You must let me organize the work the way I think best.
There are many, many great women leaders who actually play a different game. It is more collaborative. The winner doesn't take everything, but shares it more or less with everybody else. It's based on meaning and having a shared sense of purpose. It's based on building community so that everybody not only understands their part, but understands they're making a valuable contribution.
But for companies to benefit from a variety of talents, both women and men have to start off with the same advantages.
Competence is not a question of gender. Women have more diplomas than men. They possess the skill enabling them to be present in any work environment, but 2/3 of parental time and 80% of domestic tasks are performed by women. So there is a very real time differential.
After their day of work, most women take on a second invisible and unpaid position, the daily household tasks or double working day. In Europe, this takes up 19 hours a week for women and only 7.5 for men.
Women have no time to network. Men do this very well, but when a woman's dual responsibilities are done for the day, there's no time for discussions with friends, interaction, or self-improvement. There's a feeling of great solitude when a woman cannot share and does not know that others are also experiencing the same.
Wonder Woman is exhausted. How can she remain effective at work when she is required to manage domestic life as if she was a full-time housewife? Not to mention that Madame has to be sexy, efficient, maternal, and attentive while reveling in her emancipation. And what if the roles were reversed? They say that behind each great man, there's a woman. The contrary might be true as well. Cornelia Finlayson is German and a highly qualified senior civil servant. She is also a rebel mother.
Working mothers are thought of negatively in Germany. We have the Rabenbutter notion, or Mother Raven, who puts her children in the hands of others, which is now considered to be detrimental to their development. When I called my mother to tell her I was pregnant, her initial reaction was, "So, your advanced studies were useless." She was convinced that I would stop working for at least 3 years, maybe even 5.
But Cornelia now has 3 daughters and she works more than ever. She is the assistant director of the Po-Pyrénées region in France, with a staff of 1,300 people. Although she does make time for her children, she is often absent. But she has found the ideal solution. Her husband, Stéphane Basega, has put his computer engineering career on hold to look after their children and their home. A choice which is counter to family-related clichés.
Mes parents, pour eux c'est dur parce que mon
It was
père,
tough on my parents because my father liked telling people, my son's an engineer with British Telecom and he does this, that and the other. And now when he's asked what his son does, he says he stays at home with the kids. So it's a bit more complicated. I remember the first time I went to see my folks and a neighbour discussed the change with me. He said, so you're the woman of the house?
Like most housewives, Stéphane has to confront the lack of consideration. Their daughters, however, are delighted to have their daddy at home.
Avant, on avait la nounou, on l'aimait bien, mais on voyait pas assez papa et maman. Et puis, on m'a dit qu'il y a papa, c'est bien. Maman. Et maman, elle part toutes les semaines.
Mais là, c'est exceptionnel, hein?
Bah, c'est plus exceptionnel pour nous, hein, maintenant.
So, from managing the budget to the laundry, Stéphane runs the household on a daily basis.
Moi, j'avais jamais imaginé.
I never thought I'd stop working. For me, it was very complicated. Being a man and taking care of the kids in a small world of with little girls everywhere, you lose a bit of...
Virility?
Yeah, virility.
Oui.
Papa, tu peux mettre mon habit dedans?
Mais non, parce que là, on va aller dehors, ma chérie, il va faire un peu froid. Tu veux aller aux toilettes?
Mais papa, j'ai mis un col là en plus.
Donc, quand on rentrera du cheval, avant de te mettre en pyjama, tu pourras te mettre un peu en habit de danse.
And ironically, even when they stay home and assume a role traditionally assigned to women, men are more highly regarded.
C'est un peu difficile de
It's a bit difficult to find your place, but if you do, it can be fairly rewarding, more for a man than for a woman. When a woman stops working, the feeling is, well, she likes rich men, she's a kept woman, whereas I'm seen as being very courageous.
Moi, je suis courageux.
But giving up work also means being confronted to solitude.
Moi, j'ai toujours eu besoin d'être avec
I've always needed to be with people, so I'd find myself chatting with the greengrocer, or the butcher, or the baker, but there's something missing.
Même un manque qui se crée.
So Stéphane has reinvented his social life. He's become president of the association that manages their children's school and takes care of its finances and logistics.
Oui, donc il faudrait les rappeler demain pour voir, ils veulent arranger le stand comme ça, mais vous avez vu qu'ils avaient mal fait l'année dernière. Okay. Si vous pouviez les appeler demain.
Maman aime bien quand, papa?
Elle va bientôt arriver, je crois. Vas-y. Attends, je te rassemble. Vas-y, renverse.
Finally, at the end of the day, everyone has to make certain concessions.
A man doesn't keep a home like a woman does. It's just not the same. Everything's functional and there's less care for aesthetics. And if I'm away for 4 days, I know very well that the children's hair won't be brushed for 4 days. And still, everyone will be happy, especially the kids. I still often hear people say, your children are very well balanced and happy, after all.
On voit bien que tous les repères bougent.
It is obvious that things are changing. More and more men earn less than their wife, and they wonder, how can I compensate? How can I preserve a satisfactory male identity? All this needs to be invented. So it is no surprise to still hear comments like, it was better before. But men haven't yet considered the benefits of rediscovering the sphere of intimacy at home. The sphere of intimacy is not only limited to household chores, like ironing. It is also about the relationship with their children, happiness of a form of love, and about reciprocity with their children, from whom they can learn about life better than in any other context. For
the new generation, as for women, a career at all cost no longer makes sense. The old-fashioned business model is on its way out.
Millennials and women seem to be simpatico. They want meaning, they want learning and development and skill building, they want community, they want action, and they want work-life integration. They understand that work is part of life, and they want to have a life as well outside of work. So they're very similar. And when the millennials and the women sync up, you know who's left? A couple of old white men. And they're going to go soon because they're going to retire. So the world's going to change.
And the world is changing. While old-fashioned organizations are fading away, young people are creating their own businesses over new foundations. Première is a startup incubator. This breeding ground for companies assists projects centered on innovation and new technologies. Cybersecurity, connected cuddly toys, civic applications, and intelligent appliances are but a few of the more than 200 startups Première has helped to launch since 2005. And the primary selection requirement is to have at least one woman in the executive board.
Female CEOs in France number only 27%. In innovative companies, the number drops to 3. I went to Berlin to pitch. We were 200 and I was the only woman. People thought I would work as a receptionist.
In every innovation center, whether in Paris, New York, or the Silicon Valley, there is a majority of men, and no one questions this fact. When we select startups co-founded by at least one woman, we end up with a 50% ratio of men in the incubator, which feels quite natural since it's representative of how the world population should be represented.
How can one explain the difficulty in achieving this ratio?
About 64% of all women say that they don't feel capable of a major undertaking. This figure is simply due to a failing of the entrepreneurial culture. You know, very few mothers, aunts, or women around them are entrepreneurs, and so they find it difficult to think of themselves in a function which has not been feminine for years. And on the other hand, 95% of all investors today are men, and even though it is not intentional, there's a low capacity to project and to trust female entrepreneurship.
Since there is a lack of role models, women here are assisted in creating their project.
Most incubators request that you arrive with a business plan, which is complicated to do the first time, and Première provided help in this area.
Première provides us with a coach with whom we meet once a month and review strategy, objectives, figures, and public financing.
Another helpful aspect is the network, because each time you have a question, there's always someone who's had to deal with the same problem. It saves a lot of time, and you feel less alone in the face of difficulty.
Gender diversity is not only an adult issue, and it should be addressed very young. This is what Claude Thérosier does in her startup known as Magic Makers, where children learn computer programming.
I realized that computer technology was going to grow bigger and bigger with what is happening in artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, etc. So when my eldest son turned 8, I said to myself that there was no reason children couldn't start to learn about it, since programming is based on logic. It's not that complicated as long as the pedagogy is well adapted.
More than 1,000 boys and girls are learning to encode via games in about 20 centers.
The character will react if it captures the sound. So here it's a zombie that will react with a wah.
Boom! The girls love it, although the parents usually enroll their sons because subconsciously math and programming are more for boys.
At times, girls do much better than boys because boys have a tendency to say, wait, we've got to do this and this and this. Whereas a girl will say, wait, let's finish this first and see if it's right before we continue with the project.
Whether with the children at Magic Makers or the adults at Paris Première, diversity rhymes with creativity.
In a very technical incubator will be 3 women fighting a duel. At Paris Première, the woman CEO is brought forward. It's not exclusively female since there are men here as well. We're lucky to have this diversity. It creates lots of energy since we're very complementary.
For Caroline Ramad, women might possess their little secret.
We women are incredibly lucky because for those of us who want to have children, we can stop working. Stop working for 3-4 months, pause, think about what to do. Women often return to work afterwards totally transformed. And that's why I'm such a strong advocate for parental leave for fathers too. It's been found that in men's careers, when they reach 40 or 50, they blow a fuse. And understandably so. They've never stopped working and are requested to always be the dominant leader when more and more fathers want to look after their children. So I think this movement for female entrepreneurs and leaders turns out to be a vast liberation movement for men as well.
Like Antoine de Gabrielli, a number of men are also participating actively in this liberation movement. As a human resources consultant for large companies, he has seen many executive managers sacrifice their private life for their careers, leading to burnout, or even worse, suicide.
Statistically, more than 68% of men feel they can't succeed in their professional career without sacrificing their private life. That's absolutely frightening. For many men, it's inevitable. It's an accepted fact. It's the way it is. The cliché is that contrary to men, women put their personal lives ahead of their careers. And yet there are women who'd like to do the opposite. The universal question for both sexes is how can I progress professionally and still succeed in my personal and social life as part of a couple and a family?
And this motivated him to create Happy Men, a male network comprised of 400 senior managers whose goal is for both women and men to achieve fulfillment both at work and at home. Antoine de Gabrielli travels throughout France with the Happy Men in search of more new followers.
If you think of the question of equality as a female problem, to be resolved by women for women, you're seeing women as being the problem. This has to change. People have to understand that women are not the problem, that it's not about changing women. Men have to change their attitudes at the same time. In fact, we feel that since men hold the power in their hands, they play an essential role in seeking professional equality, not so much as the accused, but as major players acting in their own interests as well.
Ouais, Fabrice, 96 506, vous l'avez pas sur Alpha?
Mesdames, Messieurs, nous vous rappelons voie E, le train TER 96 506 en provenance de Lyon-Perrache et à destination d'Ambérieux, Bellegarde et Genève.
A senior manager in Lyon at the SNCF, the French Railways Company, Pierre-Edouard Hétier is a happy man. As member of the Happy Men, he would like to breathe some fresh air into his company.
SNCF is a very masculine company. It took us 35 years to go from 10 to 20% female presence. And so don't I have some responsibility? Don't I have a role to play in changing things?
To further gender balance in Lyon, the Happy Men are receiving support from an SNCF women network. This close cooperation addresses some very concrete issues.
I sometimes have to leave work early to take my son to the doctors because my wife works too and she's not always available. We have to reconcile our two careers.
These issues should be worked out together because women cannot advance the cause of gender equality on their own. We need a male point of view. and not in the spirit of women's lib versus men, but with a common objective when dealing with an issue.
Opposing sexism, telework, developing babysitting alternatives are just a few of the issues to be addressed. And when men's and women's networks cooperate, things begin to move forward.
I see a transformation whereby men are capable of speaking out and telling others, I'm part of a happy men's circle and it's enabled me to change my managing practices and my views on women, so do as I do. That's already fantastic.
Things are changing. Gender is no longer an issue in job offers. In the past year and a half, I haven't heard any cheap, sexist jokes that I used to hear. It's no longer acceptable to hang up degrading posters or calendars in the locker room. We respect one another, we joke around together, we enjoy things together, and in the long run, we're much happier at work.
By working together and going beyond the war of the sexes, men and women are gradually changing mindsets.
Men and women today do the same things in life. So there is no female or male ideal. There is a working ideal, an ideal for modern governance that must reflect the heterogeneous nature of all the parties involved. Men and women have to move ahead, take risks, look closely at one another and work together. That's what we need to learn.
Welcome to Iceland, the land of gender equality. Half of the Viking fighters were women, so the debate over male-female equality is nothing new here. For Halda Tómasdóttir, a candidate for president, this is the battle of her life.
When I was 7 years old, women in Iceland went on a strike. 90% of women did no work that day, whether they held professional jobs or their work was at home. It was peaceful demonstrations. They flocked into the center of Reykjavik and filled the streets. And this day, no banks opened, no schools opened, no workplaces really functioned. So I think this was the day that I discovered that when women are not at work, nothing works. And my first reaction was, why would women need to go on a strike? And they said, to show our value.
This strike for equal pay has become a model that feminists have imitated throughout the world. 40 years later, 98% of Iceland's women work with the support of an effective social system.
We do rate number one in terms of closing the gender gap. So I think it's about two things. It is about us having very strong and courageous women, historically, maybe even as far back as Viking age. But I also think it is because we have good men. Because I don't think gender equality is a one-sided equation.
In 2008, however, the financial crisis caused the Icelandic miracle to collapse. The nation's debt was abysmal, and many people saw their savings go up in smoke. The people's anger was so great that in January 2009, the government was forced to resign. To restore confidence, a new prime minister with unquestionable integrity and competence had to be found. The parliament chose Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir, a woman and a social democrat with a long political career.
Before the crisis, we had never had a prime minister that was a woman. We had never had a woman as a bank manager in the central bank. We had not women on boards of Icelandic companies, and the financial sector was very male-dominated.
Deputy Katrin Júliusdóttir, a 35-year-old mother, was appointed Minister of Industry, Energy and Tourism.
Jóhanna's government was a feministic government, and she decided that we would have equal amount of men and women within the government.
Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir claims that wild speculation by male bankers was the cause of the crisis. Her guiding principle was to put an end to the testosterone era.
The fact of the matter is that the financial sector has been overwhelmingly men working from a masculine set of values. They were taking excessive risk. They were thinking short term about their returns. There was not a lot of social responsibility. Egos had grown very big, and they were further fueled by big bonuses and big compensation packages. And all of this, when it combined, just didn't make sense to us anymore.
The government immediately enacted new laws imposing professional equality in all sectors.
We decided that we would stabilize the balance between the genders within the governmental bodies. And then we also decided that members of the boards of Icelandic companies needed to be at least 60-40 men and women.
As the coffers were empty, the government reduced spending but maintained the health and education budgets. There was no longer room for wild speculation. Real economy had to be developed. To bring in money quickly, Katrin Juliusdottir came up with the original idea of promoting tourism by mobilizing the population.
We asked every Icelander to become an ambassador for the country, to take time off on the 3rd of June in 2010 and send postcards, send a video that we had made, send emails, phone calls, anything they could do to invite their friends and colleagues around the world to come and visit Iceland.
That day, more than 1 million postcards and videos were sent throughout the world. In 3 years, the number of tourists attracted by Iceland rose from 500,000 to 1.7 million, more than 5 times that of the island's population. These earnings helped relaunch the economy. Meanwhile, the government continued its feminist push.
We put into force legislation to fight violence against women in their home, and we banned striptease places because we don't want to be a society that exploits women.
Did Jóhanna Sigurdardóttir's government go too far? In April 2013, her center-left party lost the legislative elections, and the right returned to power.
When we left government in 2013, we had closed the deficit in the budget. The inflation was down to just over 4%, and the interest rates were down to 6%. So that is what we managed to do in 4 years, and we were quite pleased with it.
Now there are those who believe that we are experiencing backlash, that women were brought in to clean up the mess, but now that it's pretty clean again and things look good, that it's becoming challenging again for women to remain in positions of power.
Icelandic women, however, are not ready to give up. They now understand that politics is not an exclusive men's club.
We are trying to make this a bit of a woman alliance. It is secret, maybe not anymore, that we try to, lift each other and make our voices louder.
Iceland continues to further the cause of women. In 2017, the government passed a new law requiring employers to prove that they respect the principle of equal pay. A world first. For Halda Tómasdóttir, though gender equality is still the primary battle, a new perspective is needed.
For me, this is not about men versus women. It is about the masculine versus the feminine. And women can hold both feminine and masculine principles, and men can hold both masculine and feminine principles. But when we create gender-balanced workplaces, gender-balanced boardrooms, gender-balanced political rooms, the dialogue changes. And it becomes about more than money and economic profit, which of course is important, but it comes about, what kind of a community do we want to live in? Or how are we going to continue on this journey with the fact that we have already used more than this planet can provide for our children?
In what kind of world do we want to live? A warrior world in which the dominant male continues to impose his law, or a more open and diversified one, where balance is the rule?
We're currently pretending to want gender equality, but we're actually doing a lot more to divide the sexes as much as we can, with this idea that it's very profitable for the economy.
We feel it's not going fast enough because we naively think that one act can change everything, and it's not true. We're the product of our history, of the norms of our upbringing, and we like norms. Norms are comfortable, like it or not. So we've got to work politically, use the media, encourage initiatives, and accelerate the movement now.
We can't wait 300 years for the system to get better. First of all, I'll be dead, my children will be dead, and my grandchildren will be dead. So let's do something now.